Cape Cod Broadcasting weaves the listening environments of 99.9 WQRC, Ocean 104.7, WFCC Classical 107.5, Cape Country 104, and CapeCon.com's website experience to reflect the lifestyles of the people who live, work, and play on Cape Cod. We hope that you enjoy this podcast.
And welcome into the Sunday Journal. I'm Matt Pittett. Thanks for being with us today. We get together each week to talk about issues that we are facing here on the Cape and the Islands. One issue that has been at the forefront now for some time, and it's not going away, and in some ways it continues to evolve, get worse. In some ways it's the issue of drugs, drug abuse, heroin, opiates, and another drug we're going to talk about today on the Sunday Journal that we really want to raise some awareness about. We talked with the person behind this bill a couple of weeks ago, and the State Rep Tim Whelan reached out to us and said, I'd like to talk a little bit more about this bill I have that's coming up in the legislature, and it's revolving around fentanyl and the attempt to criminalize trafficking of this drug. Tim, State Representative Tim Whelan from Brewster. Tim, thanks so much for being with us today. It's always good to see you.
Yeah, it's always great to see you too, Matt. It's an honor to be here, and thank you for affording me the time to speak with your audience.
No, sure thing, Tim. It's a very important issue here. You and I were talking about this behind the scenes recently in preparation for getting ready for our interview, and you were saying that this issue of fentanyl is very terrible. It's dangerous and deadly, but not really well known, and that's what this bill is all about. So you've got a bill that's up there on Beacon Hill right now. So let's start there. Tell us about your fentanyl bill, and then we'll get into the details of this drug.
Sure. The bill, it's House 4036. 4036 is the bill number. It was jointly filed by both myself and my good friend, the gentleman from Salem, Representative Paul Tucker. Paul is a Democrat state representative, and he's also the retired chief of police in Salem. So he and I both have a strong background in law enforcement and narcotic enforcement. So when I approached him and we started kicking around ideas for this bill, he signed on right away. And it's what's really nice about this bill, Matt, is in the joint sponsorship, which is not common, but having two joint sponsors, one from each of the two political parties, one Republican being I and one Democrat being Paul. It just speaks to the fact that this is not a partisan issue. This is a bipartisan issue. And what we are looking to do here is we are looking to take fentanyl. A little bit of background on fentanyl. Fentanyl is a narcotic. It's injected right now. It's slowly entering and almost replacing heroin on the market as the drug of choice for people with their IV drug use. Fentanyl is 100 to 200 times more potent than heroin. What it does then is when a dealer is cutting up heroin, or what they call stepping on heroin, or stepping on fentanyl, just by the strength of the fentanyl, where the dosage is in micrograms, the possibility of there accidentally being a hot shot or a fatal shot going out in a dose of fentanyl, the likelihood for there being a hot shot going out that would result in a fatal overdose it's very high. And fentanyl started as a veterinary narcotic. It was a painkiller for animals, and we were seeing it used for human use through transdermal patches for pain management for cancer patients, people in hospice, and the like. But what's happened in the past couple years is that the drug cartels have found a way to synthesize heroin in their own little illegal compounding centers or labs, and now they're producing it wholesale, and they're finding that it's more cost-effective and more profitable for them to produce and distribute fentanyl than heroin.
So what's the base of it then, Tim? The drug itself, it's a combination of different drugs, or what's kind of at the base of it?
Matt, it doesn't really have a base. You can't say that it's an opiate. You can't say that it's a coca derivative. What it is it's a synthetic. It's entirely manufactured, much as a methamphetamine is manufactured in a lab. It's manufactured. Anybody that's seen Breaking Bad would be familiar with the idea of throwing a bunch of different chemicals together into some evil mixture, and the result is, in this case, it's fentanyl, the most deadly drug that's on the streets.
So this is something that's been accelerating, the last couple of months, last year or so? What's the time frame?
Last couple of years.
Yeah, last couple of years. And you're saying it's actually starting to maybe supplant heroin as the drug of choice?
Yes.
Why is that? Is it cheaper right now? There's always usually a reason why some other drug comes on the market, right?
It's more profitable, number one. As is the case in Massachusetts, the laws with the penalties for trafficking haven't kept up with the increase of what we're seeing on the streets. So if the example that I use, Matt, right now is if you are arrested and you have a tractor-trailer load full of fentanyl, the strongest charge that you can be hit with is possession of a Class B controlled substance with intent to distribute. And there's no minimum mandatory sentence assigned to it, and there's a lower penalty. If you are caught with 18 grams or more of heroin, you are charged with trafficking, and that carries a 2-year minimum mandatory sentence, and then it has graduated minimum mandatories based upon the amount that you're carrying. To backtrack, what we're doing in House 4036 is we're taking fentanyl, which is currently not listed in the trafficking statutes, and we're just adding it to the trafficking statutes where you currently find opioids, heroin, any other opioid derivative, cocaine, any of the coca plant derivatives, methamphetamine, and you even find marijuana listed in the trafficking statutes.
So under the current statutory scheme, the way it is right now, even though fentanyl is, as you're saying, more powerful, more dangerous perhaps than heroin, that the charges that one may face are actually less for fentanyl right now than with heroin or cocaine. So.
Correct, because what happened before, Matt, was we didn't see fentanyl. The number of, to give you an example, the Undersecretary of Public Safety, Jen Quealy, gave me a list of information from the State Police Drug Lab, and what she was showing when you look at the figures, is the number of positive tests that the State Police were getting in their drug lab for heroin laced with fentanyl, 2013 versus 2015. In 2015, that was, to this point in the year, the percentage had increased 12,500%.
12,500%?
12,500%. I had to break out my calculator to figure that one out, Matt. I'm not that smart a guy, But when we broke it down to a hard figure like that, even Under Secretary Quealy was astonished. That's why our laws haven't kept they haven't kept up with the market, and we're trying to be forward-looking, and we're trying to keep our narcotics laws up to date with what's going on the evil market of drug distribution.
Brewster State Representative Tim Whelan is my guest today on the Sunday Journal. We're talking about his bill, House Bill 4036, that would criminalize the trafficking of fentanyl, and the representative has been telling us about really just the unfortunate details of how fentanyl has been increasing, not only in terms of usage, but apparently is more profitable for the drug dealers as well. And again, his bill would criminalize the trafficking of that drug. And Tim, you have, I think, kind of a special background to really have the ability to understand how dangerous this is with all your years in state police and in law enforcement. I'm sure you've seen the cycles over the years: cocaine, heroin, marijuana, all the different drugs. Where does this kind of fall as you take a look at this? You've seen it all, so you're concerned. This one's a real dangerous one.
This one scares me. I had a meeting yesterday with a group from Learn to Cope, and they're a support group for families of addicts. And it was very difficult for me to explain to them the harsh reality of the fact that the new drug on the streets, that in some cases their loved ones haven't been able to kick yet. The new drug on the street is fentanyl, and fentanyl is much more deadly than heroin. The pained look in their faces when they heard that, it said it all, Matt. We have to fight this. This is, like I said, there's a human toll that's just accumulating. And like I said, fentanyl is right now is by far the biggest, baddest demon on the street. It's worse than anything we've ever seen. You
said it's not an opiate, so in terms of if law enforcement arrives to a scene where someone's overdosing, this is probably not something Narcan can bring you back from then, right?
It was explained to me, Matt, surprisingly, it was explained to me by an emergency room doctor over at Toby Hospital, as well as representatives from Cape Cod EMS, that Narcan has proven to be effective against us. That struck me. I was surprised when I heard that, but that's one bit of good news,
I guess, right?
Shall we say that Narcan does work on it, not as effectively as heroin does, but it does work. So we do have that little bit of that little glimmer of hope, but we bring them back via Narcan. and we've got to get them out of the web of addiction if we're really going to save their lives.
You had, 25 years state police?
I had 21 years with the state police, and I was 5 years in corrections before that.
So what's going on, Tim? It seems as though, we're moving from heroin, we're going over to fentanyl, we had cocaine, crack before that. How do we get to the heart of this, in terms of getting people off of these addictions altogether? I mean, you were on the front line. Yeah,
Sure. It's a multifaceted approach. For me, I'm not going to, even with my background in law enforcement, Matt, I'm not going to say that, we're going to jail our way out of this problem. But, enforcement is one of the legs on which the stool will stand, so to speak. Without question, the most effective, cost-effective and effective route is education and prevention, and I'm very gladdened to see that we are starting to recognize that at the state level and prioritize educating our young about the dangers of narcotic use and whatever we can to prevent them from taking that first dose of an illegal narcotic, which in many cases it's just that first dose. Then for the people that are lost in the web of addiction right now, we need to be dealing with their recovery, detox recovery, and support services, follow-on support services to help them stay out of addiction once they've kicked it. But there is an enforcement component, and that's where my strength is based on my background, and that's how I'm trying to approach this.
Speaking with folks over at Gosnell, et cetera, places like that, they're packed. They are at capacity for the most part.
Yes.
So now to your role as a state representative, is there a role for the state? And I know that, these things can be expensive, but is there a role at the state level that we need more facilities or we need more treatment outlets for people?
Well, one of the things that we've discussed as a Republican caucus in the meetings that we've had is that if I remember the number correctly, is that the average number of times a person enters into the cycle of recovery when they go to a detox and then go to a rehab facility and or a treatment facility, and then they come out and they're relying on the follow-on services to help keep them clean and keep them healthy. The number of times a person goes through that cycle, I believe the number they said was 6 times.
6 times.
6 times, which is shocking. And I've even spoken to the governor, and the governor's even mentioned that, we need to focus on where the gaps are in our follow-on care so that people can look at going through it once and make it successful the first time. If we can do that successfully, that in and of itself will free up an awful lot of beds because you don't have people that are going through repeatedly. And we're also, I believe that there was, in the 2015 budget, we are going to be dealing with, in the next couple weeks, we're going to be dealing with a supplemental budget to close out fiscal year 2015. There's added money included in there for treatment and recovery. And we added more money in our fiscal year 2016 budget, and I'm looking forward to us living up to our commitment and continuing to provide adequate funding for support services.
On the issue of incarceration, your colleague Randy Hunt over the years before you were elected into office has talked about the fact that maybe incarceration, long-term incarceration, is really not the way to go because you do just have this recidivism.
Of course.
So I'm sure you've talked to Randy about that and just his thoughts on this, that we need to think maybe even an alternate way. You just can't arrest somebody and throw them into jail because honestly they're not getting the treatment in jail. They're just not. It just doesn't happen.
No, absolutely, Matt. First off, just let me state that this bill that I filed, what we're talking about here is we're talking about traffickers. We're talking about the business people. We're not talking about users. We're not talking about addicts. We're talking about the business people that are profiting off of the misery, the death that they are causing. We're talking about, I refer to them as predatory sharks that are feeding off of a very vulnerable population, which is exactly what they're doing. So these people are people that we should be having no sympathy for because they're large-scale drug dealers.
Makes sense. Tim Whelan is our guest today on this segment of the Sunday Journal. We're talking about his bill, House 4036, that would criminalize trafficking of fentanyl. As we sit here, Tim, putting our report together with you, you were hoping that this was going to get reported out to the judiciary this week, right? So if you could, for the listeners, explain what that means and what happens to the bill from here on out.
Sure. The bill was a late file. In a 2-year legislative session, bills to be timely filed have to be filed in the first couple weeks of the session. Anything after that is what they refer to as a late file. As a late file bill, it goes to the House Committee on Rules, and Rules will report it out to a particular committee that they feel speaks to the language of the bill. So the hope is that this week the Committee on Rules will report my bill out to the Joint Committee on the Judiciary for a hearing in front of the Joint Committee on the Judiciary. They haven't announced a date on it yet. I have to wait until the bill actually gets reported out before it can be scheduled. And when it's scheduled, I'll be ready.
I'm sure that you've had conversations with your colleagues on the House side, and you're going to have to obviously have the Senate on board as well for this, and the governor. So it seems like, and I don't want to, you never know what's going to happen on Beacon Hill, right? But it seems like this is a no-brainer, that you should be able to basically sit down with your colleagues on both sides of the aisle and basically say, let's do this, and let's just do it. I mean, really, why do we enough with the debate, let's do it. Right?
We have over 40 people. There were 37 that co-sponsored within the 1 week window that's allowed, but we've had several other legislators from both branches that have reached out and have offered letters of support. So we have over 40 co-sponsors of the bill as it stands right now. So you're looking at already having 20% of the legislature stating right up front that they're in support of your bill. We're very encouraged by that.
This is just, as we said, unfortunately, the latest in a line of drugs that are coming down. As you said, this is a fully synthetic painkiller. It's not like the opiates. And so, quick questions, and we have probably about 45 seconds left to go. Just to your knowledge, so we know that, unfortunately, for heroin, the gateway, and for many people, has been the opiates. They go on the painkillers, and they can't get off the painkillers. They end up on the heroin. Mm-hmm. Are we seeing kind of a similar thing? It's still the basis of this is people getting hooked on the painkillers. They're looking around and they need something after they can't get their prescription. Are they looking to fentanyl? Is that the same kind of track we're looking at with this to a degree?
It seems that people are transitioning from heroin directly to fentanyl.
So right from heroin to fentanyl.
Right. Yeah. And the word that we get back, and from people that I've spoken to, people that are in recovery and people that are addicts, is that fentanyl gives them, according to their measure, a better high. And it's being sought out right now, and it's being preferred to heroin.
Tim Whelan is the state representative from Brewster. His bill is 4036, House bill, if you want to look it up, and it would criminalize trafficking of fentanyl. Tim, we'd like to have you come back as this moves through the process and talk to us more about this as we go through it.
I would enjoy that, Matt. Thank you.
All right, thanks for being with us today, Tim. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you very much.
State Representative Tim Whelan with us today on the Sunday Journal. Again, if you'd like more information on this bill, it's House Bill 4036 in the Mass Legislature. Thanks for being with us today on this segment of the Sunday Journal. I'm your host, Matt Pitta.
This podcast is a presentation of Cape Cod Broadcasting, which is solely responsible for its content. Thank you for listening. For more information, please visit us at capecodbroadcasting.com.